Yo, what's good everyone, it's Zigzag here. Welcome back to another Geoguessr video. There are now over 100 countries in the entire world with Google Street View, and today I'm going to give one tip for every single one of those countries. This took a long time to compile, so hit that like button. Also, I'll include all these locations as a map linked in the description, so you can check that out to practice after the video. So the first country we get today is New Zealand, and one of the best ways to identify New Zealand, and specifically the North Island, is this fence with the very spammed posts. Now you can theoretically see this on the South Island of New Zealand, in Australia, maybe in the British Isles as well, but it's pretty much unique to New Zealand and very useful. Next up, we're in Brisbane, which is the third largest city in Australia, and on the poles in Brisbane and the surrounding cities, you can see this black square with the white numbers. This would be completely unique to that area and pretty much on every pole as well. Surprisingly enough, this is the third sovereign nation in Oceania that actually has coverage, and the only town that has coverage in the whole country is Ambrim. Now it's going to be super tropical here, and you have very dark volcanic soil. As well as that, there's a guy walking in front of the trekker. Now we're jumping over to Oceania's closest neighbor, and I'm going to give you a really good tip to get the province of North Maluku, one of the hardest provinces in the country. So if you see these blue and yellow bollards, or anything that's kind of Ukrainian colored like this, then there's an extremely high likelihood that you're going to be in North Maluku and nowhere else. So differentiating the two sides of Malaysia, Borneo, and the mainland can be quite a pain. However, this lamp is one of the best ones to get Borneo. It's found in Malaysia's largest state, which is Sarawak, and it's got this boomerang shaped thing on the inside of the lamp. Very, very useful. Alright, over in the Philippines, you may already know about these things called tracks. It's essentially a motorbike with a sidecar, and it's their equivalent of tuk-tuks. Anyway, this one with a single roof and a huge rounded window that almost makes it look like a spaceship, and it's only found on the very remote island of Palawan. If you can identify this and your opponent doesn't, you're going to pick up tons of points. So Singapore can be quite difficult to differentiate from Hong Kong because they both use these double yellow lines for no parking zones. However, the taxis in Singapore are quite different. You can see this one is a brand new Toyota and it's fully colored in one color. We'll see Hong Kong taxis soon, but they're very different. And shouts to this one where the company's called Zig. I kind of had to include it. So Thailand is deceptively big, but one of the best ways to get the southern part of Thailand on the peninsula is these, and these are of course oil palms. Now oil palms are much more common in Indonesia and Malaysia, but if you know you're in Thailand, you already saw some Thai language or something like that, and you see these, you should normally guess in the south. Now, ever since Cambodia received Crapcam, a lot of people confuse it with India. However, one of the most common things in Cambodia that I see people missing all the time is this rounded plastic balcony. You can see it all the time on buildings in Cambodia. In fact, I just saw another one back here, but this specific roof is very rare in India and the other countries with Crapcam, so it is very worthwhile to know. Now, there are only actually 5 places in Laos that have Google coverage, and only 2 of those have big mountains. Those are Vang Vieng and Luang Prabang. The ones in Vang Vieng are simply epic and tower out of the ground, whereas in Luang Prabang, they're a bit more mild. So now we've got some Hong Kong taxis. As you can see, they're white on the roof, and that's generally speaking going to be the case. And they're an older brand of Toyota. This I think is the Toyota Comfort. It's also very common in Japan, but of course we have Chinese everywhere here. And these will actually change color depending on the island, but the main section has the red taxi. So Taiwan, just like Japan, has a bunch of extra islands apart from the main one, and on this island called Penghu, you can see tons of these Norfolk pine trees. Now these trees are actually native to Australia, but they are absolutely spammed on Penghu and a very good way to get the island correct. So in mainland China, there's almost no coverage. You'll only very occasionally get it. However, if you do, you will notice that all the Chinese private vehicles have pure blue license plates. They will be blurred, but it's very obvious, and that's not a common license plate color around the world, so it can be very useful. There are literally thousands of metas that pros use in Japan, so I've just picked one of my favorites. We're in the prefecture of Nara, just near Osaka, and on many of their signposts, you can see this red and white arrow. Now, I have a very specific way of remembering this, which may help you, but I picture someone with a super Aussie accent saying, "What's that on the pole, mate?" Nah, it's an arrow. Like, narrow, you know, kind of sounds the same. I don't know, it's an arrow, it's Nara. That's an easy one. Okay, Japan was super specific, now we have a super general one. This one is the Korean bollard. It has this black stripe that doesn't go all the way around the bollard and this round reflector in the middle. There are similar ones in other countries, but look for this diagonal black stripe. So Sri Lanka uses a very similar pole to Thailand, and they can be difficult to differentiate, but here it is. It's concrete and perfectly square, and the big difference to Thailand is that the Sri Lankan one will only have dots near the top and not all the way down to the ground, whereas in Thailand, these dots will go all the way down to the ground. So because the country of Bangladesh is pretty much entirely dedicated to rice farming, you'll notice that the roads are slightly raised off the ground and the rice paddies will be quite a bit lower down. And to be honest, you can often tell that you're in Bangladesh just from that raised road. Bhutan is easy because it's super mountainous and you have this very unique architecture. As soon as you see one house, you should be home and hosed. Here is the very first Bhutanese house I found when I was looking. It has these white walls with the wooden sections in between. It's very traditional compared to surrounding countries like India and is a really good tip. So unlike Bhutan, Nepal has almost no coverage, and if you ever do get there, you're going to be right in the middle of the Himalayas with absolutely massive towering mountains near Mount Everest, and you're normally going to see someone hiking along it. You're almost never going to be on a road here, instead just on these hiking trails, and it is extremely beautiful. To date, Pakistan has very minimal coverage, but one of the best ways to distinguish it from India is the fact that men in Pakistan wear way wider pants. Here are some traditional wider pants, but even the man in the front here is wearing wider pants than would be typical in India. And of course, many of the women will be wearing hijabs because it is an Islamic country. So India, of course, has this bad quality camera, just like Cambodia, but in one specific section of the coverage, you get this little orange flag with some Hindi written on it. And if you see that car, you should guess right here on the border with Bihar and Jharkhand. Mongolia is scattered with tiny towns all around the country, and you'll see these yurt huts here. But if you see this light blue Toyota Prius driving behind you or in front of you, then you should be in the town of Altai, which is in central southern Mongolia. All of Kyrgyzstan's coverage happened in late 2015, so there are very specific metas for each individual town. One of the bigger towns all the way in the east, called Karakol, has very sunny coverage with a lot of melting snow everywhere, and to confirm, you should have mountains directly north of you and directly south of you. So I have a similar meta in eastern Kazakhstan. The city of Semey, which is one of the biggest cities in the country, almost always has very cloudy coverage. It can be one of the best ways to distinguish it from the other eastern cities that were also covered during the autumn time. The northern parts of Russia have some of the most vast forests in the entire world, and in the summers they can be prone to large bushfires. Therefore, if you see extremely hazy coverage, you should normally click either side of Yakutsk, because in 2021 it was a bad bushfire season when they did the coverage. Oman is the only Gulf state country to use yellow license plates on private vehicles, and apart from the Google car, it's probably the best way to identify the country. Also, even in the biggest cities, Oman doesn't have skyscrapers, which is a big difference to Qatar and the UAE. So the UAE is made up of emirates, of course, and the biggest one of these is Abu Dhabi. Now, as we can see here on the coverage map, the entire massive emirate of Abu Dhabi has no official Google Street View coverage, which means you should basically never guess that. So compared to the UAE and Oman, Qatar easily has the whitest soil. If you're in the middle of nowhere, it's completely flat and there's white soil everywhere, then Qatar could be a good option. Across Turkey, you get some very unique architecture, and one of the biggest examples is near the Syrian border in the south, where you get a lot of houses with completely flat roofs. Now, this is not at all common in the rest of Turkey, and a little bonus is that often on these roofs, you'll see a round water tank that's white, and that will also only be there. Lebanon loves to use these mesh poles pretty much everywhere, and they'll also often paint them. So you'll see some that are red like this and some that are yellow, and that would be pretty much unique to Lebanon. Did you even know that Iraq had coverage? Well, it's exceptionally rare. Indeed, it's limited to a bit of 2009 coverage in the National Museum. I kid you not, this little pathway here is the only piece of coverage outdoors in the entire country, so just memorize this courtyard and you should be fine. So in the north of Israel, just above West Bank, you get a lot of very fertile land. You can see this dark soil here. And because of that, you're going to get a lot of fruit trees and you're going to get a lot of date palms as well. And that can be a really great way to pick up some extra points over your opponent in Israel. In Ramallah, which is one of the biggest cities in the West Bank, you're going to get these black water tanks on the roofs. That is easily more common in the West Bank than in Israel, and so is a very useful tip. One of the largest cities in Jordan is Maraba, and you can see this white and yellow taxi all throughout that city. And definitely don't confuse it with the Amman taxi, which has a section of green on it. Egypt, of course, only has a tiny amount of coverage to date, but a good thing to know about Egypt is that you have a blue strip on the top of the license plates on pretty much all the license plates. So Kenya lies pretty much on the equator, but it doesn't often feel too tropical. One region, however, where it does feel very tropical is near Mombasa on the coast. You're gonna get a lot of fan palms, a lot of coconut palms, and a lot of thatched roofs. Also, the soil here will still be orange-ish, but a lot less red than you get in the center of the country. So all in all, it's a pretty easy region to get. Now, I was really trying to think of a good niche tip for Uganda, but really the best way to get the country is the Google car, which is this white truck that doesn't have a roof rack at all, so happy guessing. Now, often in Rwanda, you'll see this Google car, which doesn't have rubber strips on top of the roof like you normally see in African car countries. Combine that with the fact that Rwanda has very rich soil, and so you'll often see tons of crops around you, and you should be there. So Tanzania has the tiniest amount of coverage you can imagine. Almost all of it is in Gombe National Park, which is a national park known for monkey sightings, and here we can see a chimp riding on its mum's back here. Very cool indeed, and so if you're in a forest and you see monkeys with a lake to your west, you may be in Tanzania. So Eswatini is rightly known as one of the poorest countries in the world. However, for my tip, I wanted to point out that sometimes on Geoguessr you find yourself in gated communities, and these ones can look very wealthy and well upkept, which is not really the case for the rest of the country. So just keep in mind you will see some very nice and rich looking properties in one of the poorest countries in Africa. Now, Lesotho is another country with a very surprising place. That is this complex, which is the African Ski Resort. That's right, you're looking at a ski course in the middle of Lesotho. They do actually have one, being such a high altitude country. Now, this image was taken during the summer, but if you think you're in Africa and you see these very out of place buildings, you're going to be there. So South Africa is actually a large producer of nuclear power, and a lot of these power plants in general are found in the state of Mpumalanga. After a few random clicks in Mpumalanga, I was able to see a nuclear power plant in the distance here, and that is actually surprisingly common in this state. If you look out for it, you will find it. So Botswana will have these very tall wooden poles, and they're going to be made of very dark wood. In addition to that, you'll often see quite a few A-frame poles, which are relatively uncommon in the other South African countries. You may not have even realized that Sao Tome and Principe is in the game. It has a terrible camera quality and so doesn't show up too often, but one thing I noticed about the country is that the side of the roads will often be a very pale shade in comparison to the main road, and this is a great way to distinguish it from other countries with the crab can. Kano, which is one of the biggest cities in the north of Nigeria, can be surprisingly green. If you look on Google Maps, it'll show Kano as being in the middle of the desert, but because it is quite agricultural here, you're going to see a lot of green crops, and also keep an eye out for people dressed in Muslim attire, because compared to the south, the north is predominantly Islamic. The two biggest cities in Ghana are Kumasi and Accra, and people confuse them all the time, but I wanted to show you this location in Kumasi, which is just way too green to be in Accra. Accra is on the coast, but it's quite dry in comparison to Kumasi, so if you see this much lushness, you know which big city to guess in. Now, did you even know that Mali has coverage? This is an ultra rare country. You'll basically only see a couple of tiny tourist areas, and it's mostly going to be indoors. But if you do happen to find yourself outdoors like we are now, then you can see this French style of waffle pole is very common around the country, which is generally something you can see in French-speaking countries around the world. The fact that I just had Mali reminded me that there's actually a little bit of coverage in Afghanistan as well. Again, it's just going to be in alleyways in Kabul. Exceptionally rare. If you ever see it, comment on this video, because you could probably play a whole year or two without ever seeing it on a map, but this is what it looks like. So in Senegal, you're mostly going to have this silver Google car, which you can also see in a few other countries. However, this white cardboard box in the back window is only found in the north of the country, mostly along the N2 highway. And if you notice it, it's a great way to pick up some easy points. So Tunisia is generally speaking a flat country, but all the way down in the bottom of the coverage near the city of Gabez, you do get these dry mountains, and they're very distinctive, and if you see them, you can just click straight on the P1 and pick up some points. Alright, we're into Europe, let's do it. Malta, of course, drives on the left, so if you're ever in an alleyway with this super Mediterranean vibe, check through the window to see where the steering wheel is. If it's on the right side, then you're going to be in a left-hand drive country, and then of course Malta is the only one that makes sense. This is what's called the Italian road lines, where there's no lines in the center of the road, but there are these white outer lines like so. Now this can be seen in many European countries, but it's most common in Italy, so that should be the default guess. So in Europe, you'll often have yellow temporary lines whenever there is roadworks going on. However, for whatever reason, in Greece, they like to keep the yellow lines a lot longer than elsewhere. Now, it could be for some other reason, but just keep in mind that in Greece, you're going to see these yellow lines quite a lot. And also, they use these wooden poles, which are also seen in America, so just be careful that you don't confuse the two. So in Bulgaria, you'll almost always have tiled roofs, and the houses will almost always be 2 stories. So if you don't see these two factors combined together, you should probably lean away from Bulgaria because they are super common features. North Macedonia only has a few roads covered, and one of them is the Mother Teresa Highway just west of Skopje. What makes this stretch west of Skopje so interesting is that you have trees planted between the guardrails. It's definitely something quite rare in Europe and can be a great way to get a specific road 5K. Albania has red strips on the license plate, just like over in Kyrgyzstan. It's the only country in Europe to do so, so enjoy your free points. So the P14 in Montenegro is one of the most beautiful roads in all of Google Street View. You're at an extremely high altitude, there are almost no trees, and you're passing through these crazy mountains. Now, me and Lenley actually drove this in our Balkan vlog series, you can check that video out for yourself, but on Geoguessr, it's super distinctive. The city of Čačak in western Serbia is the only major city that they did during the autumn time, so if you notice that you're in Serbia and the leaves are getting yellow, consider guessing around Čačak. Eastern and southern Romania both love to use these metal or corrugated iron roofs. And these areas are of course really close to Bulgaria, so you get a super different architecture just across the Danube River. Remember though, as soon as you cross the mountains, the architecture in Romania is much more similar to Hungary. Now, we all know about the red Ukrainian car. It's one of the best ways to get Ukraine correct. However, one of the larger cities, Kryvyi Rih, has this specific pole paint. At the bottom of the pole, you'll have this gray section followed by a red stripe. Now, bear in mind, they do a similar paint job on railroad poles in Russia, but if you know you're in Ukraine, then it can only be in Kryvyi Rih. Croatian bollards are triangular, they have a red reflector, and the white section at the top of the bollard is only short. Hungary has the exact same bollard, except the white section at the top is much longer and the whole bollard is taller. San Marino is almost exclusively covered during the summer, so if you see something winter, spring, or autumn, you should not click San Marino. Belarus only has a tiny amount of coverage in Minsk, and it will have long white license plates with no blue European strip. One of the signature features of Polish architecture is what's called dormers. These are the windows you can see poking out from the side of the roof here, and many Polish houses will have these. It's not to say that you can't see them elsewhere, but if you see a lot of them, you should consider Poland. The international phone code for Czechia is +420, which makes sense because Prague is known for its so-called weed shops, so it's always been an easy one to remember in my opinion. And then of course we have Slovakia, which is +421, which is really easy to remember because Czechia and Slovakia split up. Switzerland is the only country with 7 dashes on its pedestrian crossing signs, and the man crossing in the picture is wearing a hat. Honestly, the best way to get Liechtenstein correct is to realize that you're in a valley that has huge mountains either side, but is remarkably flat. Combine that with a low set camera and you might be able to distinguish it from its big brother, Switzerland. This specific bollard with the black cap and the red reflector is commonly found in Austria, Slovenia, and Montenegro. However, if it's a very dark red, almost brown like this, then it should only be in Austria. Slovenia can look a lot like Austria, however one good way to differentiate them is that you'll often have these concrete blocks at the bottom of Slovenian poles, which will be common in Eastern Europe, but quite rare in Austria. Lithuania has the red and white chevron, however it has a red border, which is not found anywhere else in the world on these single chevrons, so that makes it a very powerful clue. For Latvia, I'm leaking my very own meta. I did the research and came up with this one, and I'm giving it to you right now. Smash like, of course. And it is the fact that in Latvia, you have this yellow sticker on the back of signs. It's probably about 50-50, maybe a little less, but you can almost never see a yellow sticker on the back of a sign in Estonia or Lithuania. In comparison to the other Baltics, you get this very salt and pepper texturous road in Estonia. Switching back to 2019, you can see it even more clearly here. And also don't forget that Estonia uses these short dashes just like Sweden. Finland is the only country in Europe that has the crap cam, so if you see it looking absolutely awful like this, you know it's Finland. The Swedish county of Dalarna has this horse on its bus stops. And this one makes perfect sense, as Dalarna is the county where Dalahest originate from. They're small wooden horses that you can put in your window, and so it makes perfect sense that they have horses on their bus stops. Norway is the only country in Northern Europe that will sometimes have green on its license plates. This is used for business vehicles, so you'll normally see it on vans. And I've also noticed that Volkswagen vans are especially common in Norway. If you know you're in Europe, then these square dashes on the outside of the road can only be found in Denmark. If you see German language and you already know you're in Germany, keep an eye out for a forest like this with a bunch of pine trees that have orange trunks. If you see such a forest, you're looking at Scots pines, and you should probably click near Berlin, which is where you can see most Scots pine forests. The word for street in Dutch is straat, and that's useful, but what's also useful is the fact that they have blue street signs, which is relatively uncommon in the rest of Europe and can be a great way to tell from a distance that you're in the Netherlands. Of course, in Geoguessr license plates are blurred, but because Belgian plates are written in red text, you can often tell that you're in Belgium just by looking at the blurred plates. Here's another example. You can clearly see there's a slightly pink tinge to the image. If you see a bunch of vineyards in Luxembourg like this, then you should just click in the east of the country and take your easy points. Okay, in the United Kingdom, they love to use these things in the center of the road. They're called cat eyes, and they're reflective pieces of plastic that are rarely used elsewhere in Europe apart from UK and Ireland. Here's another meta that I discovered. In the UK, wooden poles tend to be flat at the top. However, in Ireland, they're carved off at an angle like this. In addition to that, they'll often have these metal rods which are facing towards the road. If they're not facing towards the road, then you're more likely to be in the UK. France has these lavender fields, and they're normally in the valley south of Lyon. It's one of the most consistent crops, and France is the biggest lavender producer in the world, so it's also pretty useful. The biggest tip for Monaco is, of course, to look around and have a bit of common sense. You're going to see all these rich buildings and these yachts everywhere. However, one tip I have is to not trust license plates here, because you're going to see a bunch of different countries. For example, this one comes from the UK, but just don't trust license plates. Instead, trust your eyes. On rural roads in Andorra, you're going to see a lot of these snow poles. They are green, white with different colored reflectors, normally yellow and red. They're very distinctive if you've seen them a few times, and they make a lot of the roads in the country very easy. If you see a ton of these plastic tarp greenhouses, then you're going to be in this specific region in the south where they grow a ton of fruit. And that's specifically in this flat section where I have my cursor now. For whatever reason, Portugal loves the flower hydrangeas. They're not only common on the Portuguese islands like the Azores and Madeira, but they're also common on the mainland as well, so keep an eye out for them. If you see them, you may be in Portugal. Even for noobs, Iceland is a super easy country, so I thought I'd show you a very unique area. Around this lake in the east of Iceland, you often get huge forests that look very diverse compared to what you normally see, and this area will often also have a lot of wildflowers, normally yellow or purple. If you see these large cabbage leaves sticking out of the side of the road in Chile, then you're probably in the province of Los Lagos, where it's easily most common. Argentinian architecture normally looks very Latin American, however there's one city that bucks the trend, and that is Mar del Plata, which is south of Buenos Aires. In this city, you get a lot of architecture that looks very American, such as this house right here. In Uruguay, you're going to see these bollards which are yellow on one side and white on the other. I feel like a lot of people don't know this one, but it can be very useful on rural rounds. Bolivian license plates are short and written in blue text, so unlike Peru, when you look through the blur, you can often see a slight blue tint, which can help you guess the correct country. In the Brazilian state of Acre, the rural towns will often not have normal bitumen pavement, but instead pavement made of red tiles. Because these cities are so far from the rest of Brazil, you can get massive points by knowing this. In Peru, most plain concrete poles will have a pencil top. You can see on this pole exactly what I mean, and it's a very powerful tip because it's the only place in South America to do so. On taxis, Ecuadorian license plates are dark orange, or at least have a dark orange strip. Now this is also the case in Chile, so be careful, but both countries look relatively different. If you're in Colombia, it's worth checking how the lamp is attached. If we zoom into this one here, we can see an H-shaped metal attachment here, and if you see that sideways metal H, then you should be in the capital city, Bogota. Because it's in the Caribbean, you're going to see a high ethnic diversity in the DR. Therefore, compared to other places in South America, you're going to see a lot more people with dark skin, but you can also see many with more European ancestry as well. But checking what the people look like can be legitimately useful. Panamanian license plates are the only ones to have this cyan strip at the top of the plate. Very simple, very useful. It's a country that's coming out soon, and the best tips to get it are to remember that it's got blue license plates, or at least blue text on the license plate, and it's a very proud country, so knowing the difference between this flag and the Thai flag, which have colors inverted, is useful. If you see this pure green pole, then you're more likely to be in the east of Guatemala than the west. In the north of Mexico, they tend to put the crossbar of the pole a little lower. And if you notice this feature on a wooden pole, then you should be in the states of Sonora or Sinaloa. The USA is so huge that you're going to get very different road textures around the country. And one of my favorite ones is the orange pavement in Memphis. Many of the roads around Memphis, Tennessee will have this color to them, and it's rarely found outside of Mississippi and Tennessee if you're in the South. One of the strangest tips to get Canada correct is that in the province of Prince Edward Island, almost all the main roads have freshly mown grass for the entire island. I have no idea why this works, but if you keep your eye out, you will get close guesses using this. And that concludes the video. To my calculations, Google Street View is currently in 105 locations, so that was 105 tips. I hope you all really enjoyed it. Let me know if I missed anything, and I will see you guys in a video very soon. Till next time, and goodbye.